Alright guys, I wanted to go over the ESPN Industrial Revolution assignment that we did in class. So just follow along with your ESPN charts and add to anything that you don't already have. So let's get started with the E in the ESPN chart, economic characteristics of the Industrial Revolution. So one of the things that you need to have on your chart is industrial capitalism. And when we watched the crash course video, John Green did a good job of explaining how industrial capitalism isn't quite the same thing as regular capitalism. We'll talk more about capitalism next block. But in industrial capitalism, you really want to focus on industry, all right, or big business. So when you think of industrial capitalism, think about the factory model, and this was in the reading, all right, long hours, bad working conditions, unskilled labor, all right, looking at the picture, you can kind of see lots of people working in a big crowded room, not very safe or healthy working conditions, all right, and this really turned into big business. As these businesses started to grow, they started making lots and lots of money. They started taking over other companies, and eventually you would start to have monopolies, which we'll talk about more later. But these big businesses, they focused on mass-produced goods. They tried to operate at a cheap cost, which was good for consumers. Now, the social characteristics of the Industrial Revolution, you should have urbanization. So this is somewhat caused by the enclosure movement, which we're going to talk about on the next slide. But basically, there's a massive shift, all right, from rural to urban migration. And so you'll see lots of cities double, triple, quadruple in size during the early 1800s. And so as people started to move into the cities, there was really bad living conditions. There was filth everywhere on the street. And so this really changed the family dynamic. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, all right, was cottage industry. Families would work together in the home. They would sing songs as they worked. They could take breaks as they pleased. They made high-quality goods. And this all changed in the Industrial Revolution, all right? This is more what the Industrial Revolution looked like at a workplace, all right? People working independently, typically unskilled labor, and the whole key was productivity, all right? And this also kind of gave rise to women and children in the workplace, all right? And this was a big issue because women and children were seen as unskilled labor, and they weren't paid near as much as adult males were. So when we did the life of an industrial worker, right, I told you guys that adult males got paid 10 cents an hour, but females only got paid 5 cents an hour, and children even got paid less. They got paid like 2 cents an hour in that activity, and so that was to simulate that. So for the political characteristics of the Industrial Revolution, they had to kind of answer the question of what's the role of government, all right? So according to Adam Smith, which we're going to learn a lot more about next block, all right, he called for a government hands-off approach, or a laissez-faire. It's a French word. In which the government stayed out of the marketplace, all right? They weren't supposed to become involved in business, all right? But when you have that, you have businesses that's kind of in this cartoon right here. They take advantage of workers. So you had high rent, you had low wages. They're trying to squeeze every nickel out of the employees as they can because that increased profits. One of the easiest way to increase profits in the Industrial Revolution was to pay your workers less. And so that gave rise to a new political organization called labor unions. All right, so labor unions were workers' organizations and they basically came together to come up with better working conditions for themselves. All right, so one of the things that they would do is they would threaten to strike, and they would strike sometimes, which basically means that you would stop coming to work, and so you're not really making money, but the company isn't making money either. And so they fought for workers' rights. They fought for less hours to work a week, higher wages, better working conditions, and so Also, something that came about was child labor laws. Children were used in certain industries, like in coal mining. All right, they would send kids down into the mines, into places where adults couldn't fit, and this was a very dangerous job. And so there was a big push to end child labor laws. And so after child labor laws were established, you see the rise of public education. So if you ever wonder why you're in school, you can blame the Industrial Revolution. But I promise you, it's better than working for an industrial capitalist 200 years ago. So one of the other things, one of the abuses of the industrial capitalist was the use of monopoly. So the reading kind of talked about this a little bit with Rockefeller and Carnegie, with Standard Oil and steel. But a monopoly is basically when a business owns almost all of the marketplace. So in other words, it's just like the game, right? The goal of the game, Monopoly, is to get control of the entire board. Well, when you only have one company producing goods, they can charge whatever price they want. Imagine if Apple was the only cell phone company out there. They could charge $5,000 for a cell phone, and you would have to pay that amount if you wanted a cell phone because there was no other options. There was no competition. So one of the main characteristics of a capitalist economy is competition between firms. Firms is a fancy word for companies, and that drives the price down for the consumers, which is you guys who pay for stuff. So environmental characteristics of the Industrial Revolution. First, this was in the reading, the enclosure system, or the enclosure movement. You'll see both terms. And basically this was the idea. So as people started to move from the countryside to the cities, rich landowners would buy up this land and they would enclose that land with a fence or shrubs around it, all right? And so this really caused people to move from the city, to the city from the countryside, and they started these massive farms, all right? So when you talk about agricultural technology, one of the things that the reading focused on was the use of chemical fertilizers. And also, the picture to the right, Cyrus McCormick's mechanical reaper, right? So this is the idea of mechanized labor, right? You have a machine doing the work for you. So you can have more land, less workers, and you can produce more food using technology. And also, one of the environmental characteristics of the Industrial Revolution is pollution. All right, and this was a bad characteristic. So as these industries grew and grew and grew, there was no environmental protection agency. There was no laws against polluting the environment, and so companies really abuse this. All right, so you can see in this picture, this is a real picture from the Industrial Revolution, how much pollution just one factory is putting into the air. And so cities became really polluted, very, very unhealthy, and so eventually there would be laws against polluting so much in cities. So the effects of the Industrial Revolution are, one, working conditions. So at first, working conditions were terrible. All right, they're getting paid very low wages, horrible conditions, long hours. All right, but eventually, the Industrial Revolution created more jobs. All right, so more jobs was important to creating new social classes. And it also led to, through the works of labor unions, you would have workers having increased wages and also shorter working hours. All right. Another important effect of the Industrial Revolution was a new social class, so especially the middle class, right over here. So the middle class were factory owners and entrepreneurs, business owners, and when you think of middle class, you think of typically a class that's not really rich, but this middle class was rich, and typically they would be more rich than the upper class, and there would be some animosity between these two social classes, and it was really this idea of old money versus new money and what's better. Another effect of the Industrial Revolution was the size of cities. So you can see here in the chart, the city of Manchester increased by 300,000 people. The city of Leeds increased by 100,000 people. So you see massive growth of cities, and when you have massive growth of cities in that short amount of time, you have really bad conditions. Disease was rampant; it would spread everywhere. There was filth in the streets, really bad living conditions. But this would eventually lead to improved housing, improved sanitation, improved diets. And so the short-term effects of the Industrial Revolution were not very good. There was typically low wages, horrible living conditions. But as industrial capitalism was brought into check with government, there was a lot better long-term effects of the Industrial Revolution that we still see today.